when I would watch a lot of your shows, you talk a lot about the negative insurgency.
Mm.
So I'm curious, like, where that came from for you, and how did you conceptualize that? Because one of the things that when I first came across your Frog Logic program years ago, I was already a professional neuroscientist. I was doing a postdoc, and like when you're talking about positive and negative insurgencies as you framed them, the brain has positive and negatively charged ions that will make cells fire or not fire. And it's not a good or a bad thing in that respect. So sometimes you want to inhibit cells or brain areas from firing because they're going to make you do something you shouldn't do. So like think of like Tourette's is a problem where that inhibition is gone. And so you need the negative balance with the positive. I know that's not exactly the way you frame the negative insurgency with, but where did that come from, and how did you tap into applying that with like the brain-based integration of, all your mentoring and leadership stuff that you're doing?
Well, the biggest thing for me was the fear that was always present. And I remember when I left the agency, one of the number one questions you'd get was, were you afraid in training? And I was like, it's such a personal question. And I was kind of a snapperhead, and I was just like, well, I'd make some stupid, have you ever had a 300-pound boat on your head, immersed in freezing cold water, running 200 miles with, 96 straight hours, you're up 4 hours of sleep in a full week, and they'd be like, no. And I go, you'd be afraid too, and it's like, that's how I would push back similar questions about combat. But then someone asked me for real, like, how, if you were so afraid, how'd you do it? And I didn't know the answer to that. And so that began this going down this road to understand where fear comes from and where it originates and how we're taught it and how we cultivate it. And so, I mean, the first place you start is fight or flight, and then you understand the limbic system and how the amygdalas work and how the hippocampus works. And then I found a book on positive neuroscience, and that was by Martin Seligman. And that one was a massive flip for me, because I was like exactly what you said, there is a positive and negative electrical thing taking place. And when you understand how our hormones and our stress hormones work, and that war that's taking place between those in your limbic system, right? And then the big one was, your amygdalas actually can generate positive emotion as well too. And the case study was like, you go to a concert and there's 65,000 people. Like, I just took my family, we were up to New York over the summer, and we went and saw Zach Bryan. And at the end, he sings this song called Revival. And it's like a 20-minute song. And there were 60,000 people singing this. And I'm looking at my children, from 12 to 17. And then I'm looking at people in their 60s screaming the song, females, males, different races, different genders, different cultural backgrounds, and the same energy is being exuded. And so I'm like, whoa. And then I thought back to the suffering and the pain of combat and how that affects everybody. It's the energy that infuses into us under sorrow or pain or whatever. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So it's really, I think, an idea of perception. And that's why, like, fast forward, Jordan Peterson, when I'd gotten canceled off the internet, and lost everything, lost my business from COVID, everything, I'd lost it all. I found this lecture he gives called Restructuring Your Perceptions Part 2. And the way he deconstructs it and then builds it back up, right? From the nature of writing a book, right? Well, I'm not, I start at, I'm going to punch a key, and then I'm going to punch multiple keys, and I'm going to connect those keys into a word. Then I'm going to put these words into a phrase. And then I'm going to put these phrases in a paragraph, and hopefully that paragraph makes sense. Well, what's the intention behind the paragraph? What are you going to teach? And so these perceptions of each step, each phase, each concept, And so you build on those, right? And the more ambitious that you want to be becoming a Navy SEAL, the more you have to have, a focused conviction towards the steps it takes to get there. Well, each step is riddled in pain and fear. And so if my perception's off, then I'm never going to get to reach the pinnacle of the ambition, right? And so I'm putting all this together, and then all of a sudden I start understanding how we teach fear, how it's built into almost every fabric of every phase of your life, right? From the immediacy of physical fear. Don't touch the hot stove. Don't cross the street without looking. Don't go up next to that bad guy, all the way to the point, well, if you don't accomplish this, you're not going to be accepted into society. If you don't, and so now
fear's a crazy thing.
It's a fucking crazy thing, right? So I get after like 2 years of this, and I'm like, yeah, but none of what I was figuring out gave me the answer of the unknown realities, how it just hits you when you like you don't even, you be 1 minute you're good, and then some little thing getting pinned on a mat can destroy a whole season. One submission or one mistake can spiral the entirety of this pathway you're on. Why is it so profound? And I immediately correlated it because guys were starting to commit suicide. It started to pick up. And meanwhile, these are the most impressive, hard human beings I've ever known in my life, but they're spiraling out. What's going on? And it became these invisible battles that nobody, and you talk about that isolation, it's the invisible battles that emerge. And it starts as the whisper or the scratch, right? Or starts as the itch, or it starts as the doubt. And those are the insurgencies. And those were the people we were fighting. They weren't the army in front of you. It wasn't toe to toe, because you can rationalize toe to toe, right? You can generate, that's the liftoff. That's going to Mars is the toe to toe fight. But it's, hey, well, you got to get back in the fight every day for 3 years. And that's what ends up breaking. It's
fighting another person is the easiest thing in the world.
Hands down.
Fighting yourself, like wrestling and fighting yourself, that's the ultimate opponent, and that's the real battle. And so it resonated with me when I was hearing you share a lot of that, both online and then again here. Fear is so powerful. I've heard it in two different ways. Like I had friends who were test pilots at Edwards, and they would say for a while, part of the sort of maxim is like, guys wouldn't want to go up and fly with people who weren't married with kids, because it changes your risk calibration.
That's right. And
it makes you more governable by fear, because fear is a helpful thing and a good thing too.
That's right.
Like just like I'm sure like you there's probably exceptions to this too, right? But like, it's probably nice to go out on patrol with people who have a family that want them home.
100%. They're more focused. They're more acutely aware. They're paying better attention.
Are they going to take different risk profiles?
Some do, but most don't. Most the guys that I've worked with, it reinforces their determination to not make mistakes.
Precisely. But that's the risk profile. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You make sure that you take the risks that are calculated.
That's right.
And mistake proof. Because there's a different thing, but at the same time,
the cowboys go away quick once there's other people involved.
Well, and who wants to strap your wagon to a cowboy that doesn't want to come home?
That's right.
People ask about this with Mars all the time. They're like, would you take I'm like, no, it's a return trip home. You don't want to go with somebody who doesn't want to come home.
That's right.
And astronauts would say this at times. I forget who, I've heard from somebody, but they would say that people would ask him, are you scared? He's like, well, yeah. He's like, I don't want to go to space with someone who's not scared.
I mean,
why would you? And in combat, when we go to UFC or mixed martial arts stuff, like it's like when you mentor and coach guys training up before the match, they got the butterflies. They got this. And they're scared.
Dude, I worked with one of the greatest UFC fighters in human history, Andrei Arlovsky. And I remember when I was working with him, he was in his 18th year. And I remember we were getting ready to go in a fight. It was, I think, his Chicago fight that I did with him. And you could tell, I watched it come over him. And I'd been with him 2 fights before, and it was a little bit different in those, but this one was more meaningful. That's where he'd got his start. He lived in this one world shitty apartment, and now he's back to the space, and it's like he's in the twilight of his career. And you saw it, and I'm like, are you all right? And he's like, yeah, I'm good. And I was like, are you feeling it more intensely? And he's like, yeah, of course I am. And he's like, and I'm like, why? And he's like, I'm going to get into a fight. And there's no other thing.
But like I tell kids, like when you don't feel the butterflies is when you should be worried.
Yeah.
They're a good sign that you know what's at stake, you know what's that happened. And so you teach the kids to embrace that. That's not a thing to be scared of. That's a fear to embrace, because it means you're on the right path. And it's funny. So we had a really similar conversation a couple of years ago. I used to have a podcast. It was a really crappy YouTube show with Linland, and Eddie Penny was our guest.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's very gracious. He came down, and I was just happy to be a fly on the wall, listen to the 2 of those guys. So Eddie and him were talking about the same thing he was asking Matt, what's it like when you go into the ring, to fight in front of Putin or something. And Matt was like, listen to Eddie talk about like, what's it like when the back door of the helicopter comes down and you're out and it's go time, right? On a mission or something. And it was so funny to see the totally different worlds completely matched between the 2 of them, because Matt's answer to Eddie was like, when I heard that pin drop in the door of the octagon and I knew that it was locked. They were talking about this fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matt's like, his answer, he's like, I knew they couldn't escape. And Eddie's like, yeah, that's how I felt leaving the helicopter. He's like you weren't scared at all at that point. He's like, once that
and
switch
is
flipped, you're not scared of what happens to you. You know that they can't get away from you now.
That's right.
And that is a warrior's mindset.
That's right. That's right. And you can through stress inoculation, you can teach that, right? That's why I say don't seek out to be fearless, because there's no such thing, but to embrace that fear and use it as the motivation that drives you forward, right?
Well, and that's why I asked about it, because when you were describing those moments of using fear through your Bud's training, the boats, when the people were asking, weren't you scared? You're like, well, yeah, but like that's why I think it's important with stress inoculation, you can have this little fear training. People need to build this up in their life.
That's right.
Because it gives you the tools to say like, I know how to suffer. And if I'm going to lose something from this, I'll be okay. Like so you're going to punish me. Okay. I can handle a punishment, or I can handle the pain because I know I'm strong. I know that we can survive.